All right, now let's start getting into some more of the MLOps principles behind your pipeline flow. So now that you've run all of your pipelines, you've done your data handling, you've done your feature engineering, your data versioning, model training, everything up until now, it's time that you do some validation. So this is where you'll actually go back through and see if there's really any errors that came up, if there's any weird behavior that should be addressed. So it's where you really go back through and make sure that every step in your MLOps pipeline runs exactly like you expect it to. Because what you're going to do at this point is start maturing your MLOps pipeline. Basically, you know that you're starting to mature your MLOps pipeline as you start to add more automations, and those automations execute reproducibly and they have the expected output every time, no matter what happens. So, this is where you'll maybe go back through some notes that you've taken as you've built out your MLOps pipeline, if there's anywhere you see a script that's run, or if there's a button that needs to be clicked, anything that you think can be reasonably automated, this is one of the places you start to look into that quite a bit. So again, errors might be things like the formatting of your data doesn't come through consistently every time when you do your ETL pipeline. Maybe there's some issue with your data source and a different type of ETL needs to be run on that specific data source before the data joins the other ETL that everything else goes through. Maybe you run into some weird behavior between staging and production, and you start to notice maybe it is because you have a CPU on staging versus a GPU on production. This is the time to really nitpick every part of your MLOps pipeline because, again, we're at the point where you can really start to bring in a lot of automation with some of these tools that we've explored throughout this class. Something that will really help you when you're trying to validate your pipeline flow and make sure everything is running as expected is to draw a diagram. If you haven't done this already, this honestly is something that should be done kind of in the beginning of the whole MLOps discussion, but if you've just been maybe on a team of yourself or a smaller team of ML engineers, there's a chance you probably just put something together and you've been updating it as you learn new things. So whether you start it with a diagram or not, this is really the time to make sure you do have a diagram that explains how this whole process should work and how things connect to each other. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. It can be something simple like this. This is a very simple MLOps pipeline. So we have our data ingestion, which comes from production. So we have fresh current data. Then we do our exploration, any data validation, the cleaning, the labeling. We do all of our data handling in that box right after data ingestion. So you see that has a lot of different moving parts inside of it. And if you're trying to have a really granular diagram, you would probably break down those processes even more than what you see here. But we know after we've done all of our data handling, we've got our feature engineering out of the way, we're going to go straight into model training, do some evaluation, test the models, and then package them. So this is completely dedicated to the step in our MLOps process where we're using a tool like MLflow or DVC to track all of those experiments. We're packaging our models, whether it's into Python packages or something that you'll use in a batch prediction process. All of that is happening in this section right after we've done all of our data handling. And you'll notice there are a couple of different places that extend from this model section. So there's something that you can have as an extra, and I do highly recommend it as you start to mature your MLOps pipeline. It's not something you need to set up when you're just getting started, but as you mature the pipeline and you see how this process goes a few times, you might decide to create a model registry. And a model registry is basically some location. It can be an S3 bucket or really any type of object storage or location that you can just store all of your models. So any model version that you package that gets approved for pre-production or even just for production can go in this model registry. And as you start to build more and more onto this MLOps pipeline, you might even have different model registries, one that's just for staging and one that's just for production. So you have a lot of freedom and flexibility with the way you set up your architecture at this stage. And then the other branch we have coming from this whole modeling cluster is our CI/CD pipeline. Because like we mentioned, maybe you're using MLflow to track your experiments and you have a script that checks all of the metrics for all of your model experiments, and then that script selects the version of the model with the best metrics, and based on that you create a pull request to GitHub that, I don't know, points to some kind of staging branch, and once that pull request gets merged to staging, it triggers your CI/CD pipeline. So all of that's happening maybe in that model packaging step. It might happen at the model testing step. That's where this validation is really going to bring the light on where certain parts of the process should happen. Maybe you'll see some things that need to be moved around, but either way, you can see that you have a couple of places your model will go after this whole model cluster is finished. So even if you have your model registry, your CI/CD pipeline still might refer to it, because you might need to do something like roll back your production API to a previous model, and now you can do that because your CI/CD is connected to your model registry. And then of course, after you've gone through all of everything, your CI/CD pipeline leads to production. So that's the overall goal with validating your pipeline, is to make sure it matches any diagram you already have, and if you don't have a diagram, to make sure that you draw one. This is a good time to run end-to-end testing and work on any processes to automate your end-to-end testing. So just see what it's like when a user interacts with an API. And you might do that with something like Selenium, or you might do it with some kind of manual testing. Always commit your configurations to version control, because as you go through this pipeline and you start to see where environment variables are different, resources are allocated differently, you need to keep track of that. So commit those configurations to your version control. And schedule regular maintenance cycles. You can't just build an MLOps pipeline and then leave it. There's always going to be little things that need to be updated, even if it's just updating the packages that you use. But at least once a quarter, make sure you go through and analyze your MLOps pipeline for anything that can be updated or done better. So we're going to quickly look in VS Code for some of the things that you can check. The biggest, well, not the biggest, one of the things you can check is, again, make sure your environment variables are pointing to the right location based on the environment you're deploying to. When it comes to monitoring for drift, make sure you're at least checking for some kind of target drift and data drift. When it's feature engineering, make sure you're committing your data sets to some kind of data version control. And then when you're handling your experiment tracking, just make sure you're using a tool that automates that experiment tracking for you. These are some things that you can start to do to validate your pipeline.